2020 for the Nintendo Switch has been a very strange year. What I thought would be a flagship year for the system with the PS4 and the Xbox One winding down has really been anything but that, with few announcements from Nintendo, not too many games released, and just a weird year overall. So in this video, I basically want to talk about some of the facets of Nintendo's 2020 thus far. I want to talk about the games we've gotten for the Nintendo Switch, the announcements that we've gotten for the Nintendo Switch, and the reasons and the problems behind Nintendo's philosophy with this year thus far. And then finally, I want to wrap things up on how they can solve this problem, because I don't think that the year is a complete waste for the Nintendo Switch. What's going on, guys? I'm RGT85. If this is your first time on the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. But without any further ado, let's talk about the Nintendo Switch's 2020 thus far, what the problems are, and how they can fix them. So to kick things off, let's talk about the games we have gotten so far from Nintendo for the Nintendo Switch in the year 2020. Kicking things off, we got Tokyo Mirage Sessions FE, which of course was a port of a Wii U game that was a very niche sort of RPG musical game that some people did enjoy when it originally came out on the Wii U, so it sort of made sense for it to get a second chance at life on the Nintendo Switch. Then we got arguably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, games of 2020 for the Nintendo Switch with Animal Crossing New Horizons. This game sold extremely well. It really started to sell well during the pandemic that we were in, and people were stuck at home. So you picked up a Nintendo Switch, you picked up a copy of Animal Crossing, and you were able to somewhat live a second life. Of course, this is Nintendo's sort of games as a service game where they are constantly adding in new things via online updates. So it definitely has a lot of replay value for fans of the Animal Crossing series. Then we got Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. Once again, another port from a previous Nintendo title. This game originally released on the Nintendo Wii, was then brought over to the new Nintendo 3DS as a launch exclusive for that title that would only run on the new Nintendo 3DS, and then of course was brought over to the Nintendo Switch with enhanced visuals and an added story chapter. Then we got Clubhouse Games, which was a combination of various mini games that is honestly pretty fun, a budget title, but nothing that's really going to light the world on fire. And then finally, we got Paper Mario The Origami King, which has been so far my favorite Nintendo Switch title of 2020 when it comes to first party games. I thought this was a really solid action RPG game, great writing, great visuals, and just really well done production for this game. So 5 games in 7 months isn't admittedly terrible, but when you look at some of these titles, obviously some of them were very niche. A game like Tokyo Mirage Sessions FE, that's got a very small audience to it. Things like ports from other systems as well, they just sort of have a limited range when it comes to games as far as people wanting to pick up these games once again, especially if they are diehard Nintendo fans. I think the main problem is, though, the fact that there is nothing known for the Nintendo Switch for the rest of 2020 from Nintendo. Literally nothing. There is not a single game that has been revealed for the system that is coming anytime soon. So going into the tail end of summer and fall and winter, we really know absolutely nothing about first party titles for the Nintendo Switch.
Where the video games?
Moving on though, let's talk about some of the Nintendo Directs we've gotten in 2020. Of course, there have been game-specific ones, things like Super Smash Bros. Getting additional characters, Pokemon getting additional DLC, and of course, Animal Crossing just being sort of revealed. And those are fine, you know, I don't have a problem with them necessarily, but I don't really consider them to be sort of new announcements because it's not about new games, it's just supplementing stuff for games that you probably already own, because let's face it, a lot of people buy Nintendo Switch first-party titles when they own a Nintendo Switch. Now, as far as Nintendo Directs are concerned, we have gotten 2 in the form of mini directs. The first mini direct happened back in March, and honestly, I thought it was pretty solid. There were some really solid third-party games from 2K that were announced during this event. We got the Clubhouse Games announcement, of course. We got a better look at Xenoblade Chronicles and a release date for that game, and of course, we got some additional Pokemon stuff. So that was somewhat decent, I felt. You know, no real problems with those. I was excited for the third-party announcements. And then we got a third-party direct, and well, that was definitely very lacking for a lot of people. You had DLC for Cadence of Hyrule, which is a game that, you know, once again, it's kind of a sort of smaller niche indie game. WWE Battlegrounds, Rogue Company, and 2 Shin Megami Tensei titles coming in 2021. Now, obviously, the Shin Megami Tensei stuff was very interesting, and a lot of people were excited for that stuff, but still, they're 2021 games. And really, once again, I hate to use this term, but Shin Megami Tensei is sort of a niche title. If you are not a fan of RPG games, that really isn't going to do do much for you. Of course, we did get a few other things, such as the Pokemon Direct where Pokemon Snap 2 was announced, but really those were more focused on the Pokemon franchise, more so than on the Nintendo Switch themselves. Really, Pokemon Snap 2 was the biggest announcement from those, and I definitely super enjoyed that, but still, we don't have a release date for that game. Is that a 2020 game? Is that a 2021 game? It's really sort of up in the air when it comes to that. So now that we know what Nintendo has done in 2020, we have to sort of look at why this has been happening. And obviously one of the main reasons is of course because of real world situations. The world was pretty much shut down for a few months to where nobody was working, everyone was stuck at home, and unfortunately that sort of translated into what Nintendo was doing. Nintendo employees evidently have very poor work from home conditions. This has been documented, but I think it's sort of a strange thing because I don't necessarily blame it on Japanese culture or anything, because Japan is a very advanced place. Lots of game developers in Japan were able to do things from home, such as work on these games, but Nintendo just wasn't set up with this sort of infrastructure. You can look at things like Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Resident Evil 7, both games which actually came to the Nintendo Switch via a streaming service, but both of these were only available in Japan. Nintendo is definitely a bit behind the times when it comes to their work from home conditions, and it's definitely showing a glaring omission in their philosophy. One thing I see a lot of people saying is, what about Nintendo of America and Nintendo of Europe, where people can work from home? Let's be real about these two companies though. Nintendo of America and Nintendo of Europe, these are essentially marketing firms for Nintendo of Japan in these regions. They don't really do things like create games, they just talk about the games that Nintendo of Japan has created, market them in the appropriate regions, and get people excited for these games. They work on things like translations and whatnot, but as far as actually developing and creating the games, these are essentially marketing firms. They handle the distribution side of things. So what does all this mean in terms of problems for Nintendo and the Nintendo Switch in 2020? It's obviously not doom and gloom or anything like that. The system is still selling very well, but there are some key facts to consider when you're talking about the Nintendo Switch user base. The Nintendo Switch does not have the third-party support of companies like Sony and Microsoft because of the fact that the Nintendo Switch is essentially a weaker system than the PS4 and the Xbox One. So because of this, your titles like Madden, your titles like Call of Duty, your titles like Cyberpunk, all of which are coming out in 2020, these companies can have these games come to their platforms and sort of fill in the gaps, whereas Nintendo doesn't really have that luxury when it comes to the Nintendo Switch. The main thing is that new hardware is coming very soon from Sony and Xbox, with of course the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. People are very excited for these systems. People are buzzing about these systems. People are talking about the games coming to these systems, and Nintendo is just sort of getting left behind in all of these conversations because of the fact that there is the great unknown. We don't know what Nintendo is doing in 2020, so if there's no games to talk about, what are you really supposed to be excited for when it comes to your Nintendo Switch in 2020? So what is the solution to all of these problems? Is Nintendo sort of putting themselves in a weird position for the rest of 2020? Should Nintendo Switch owners be looking at their back catalog of games, which is sort of a popular sentiment that I see on things like Twitter? Oh, just play your back catalog of games, you haven't played all of your games. And I do understand that mindset, but I also think it's silly to sort of shame people for wanting to have new announcements, to wanting to know about new games coming to their platform. A lot of Nintendo Switch owners, like I said, buy first-party Nintendo games on the system. That's the reason they buy a Nintendo Switch, and I feel like a lot of time has passed to where the point is you're going to play the games that you want to play from Nintendo, and if you've played those games and beaten those games and become tired of those games, you'll want to look forward to new game announcements. I don't think it's silly to want new games to come to your system. So what's the solution? You got to announce games, but when you look at the games that we know about for the Nintendo Switch from Nintendo thus far, we pretty much know that a lot of these games are probably not coming in 2020. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 is a game that a lot of people talk about, but I really don't see that game happening this year. I think this is a 2020 release, probably an early 2020 release, maybe around springtime, but it's definitely not going to be a 2020 game, at least in my opinion. Of course, you have the Super Mario 35th Anniversary Collection, which is pretty much a lock for this year. It has a variety of Super Mario games from the 3D era, such as Super Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine, Super Mario Galaxy, and then a deluxe version of Super Mario 3D World, but still, they essentially are just rehashes of previous games. I'm obviously going to love them, but they're games that we have already played. No More Heroes 3 and Bayonetta 3 seem a very far way off, and Metroid Prime 4 is nowhere near ready. However, though, there is a glimmer of hope when it comes to 2020 and the Nintendo Switch, and I have to throw it back to Paper Mario and the Origami King. Paper Mario and the Origami King literally came out of nowhere. It got a debut trailer, and then it got a release date of 2 months after the fact. No Nintendo Direct, no sort of hype. It just appeared out of nowhere, and everyone was like, wow, where did this game come from? There was no insider reports or anything that this game was happening or people knew about it. So Nintendo is obviously still very great at being able to keep secrets. It's been a very weird year for Nintendo in 2020, but really, if they are able to supplement this Mario collection with like 2 or 3 first-party titles and some heavy hitter 3D third-party ports, they will be fine this holiday season. Let's be real. Mario sells. If you see Mario, you are interested in it. You're like, what is this? There's a new Mario collection out there, and this is going to sell very, very well, especially if they're able to do something like a bundle with this collection. I really feel like the Nintendo Switch isn't a lost cause in 2020. It's just the fact that they need to announce these games. I don't care if they're in a Nintendo Direct. I don't care if they're in a press release, but you gotta talk about something. You have to get people very excited about your company again, especially with things like the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X looming on the horizon. Nintendo has gone through lulls as a company before. It's a fact. They've had some years that are just sort of off years. And I feel like this first half of 2020 has been sort of an off year due to, of course, real world situations and the fact that they just didn't really plan for stuff like this. But I definitely think that they can end the year strong with 2020 with some new game announcements, some exciting stuff for Nintendo Switch owners, and all will be right in the world of the Nintendo Switch. Alright, so those are my thoughts on the Nintendo Switch thus far in 2020. Definitely been a bit of a rocky year, but I do feel like they can finish up strong with this system in 2020 and still get people very excited for it. Almost like a report card, but I'm not going to give it a letter grade because you probably wouldn't like my letter grade. But let me know in the comments section down below what you think of everything. Do you think Nintendo can salvage this year? Is this year just going to be a wash for them? And what games do you sort of hope for are stealth drop announcements for the rest of 2020 when it comes to the platform? And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Check out other videos on the channel as well. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Later.